Going back to Alex, you mentioned something interesting about Solana and an issue you've been trying to tackle on indexing and syncing, the complexities around it, how we can bootstrap the indexer community in a secure way. Do you want to share some notes? You want to open the discussion here?
I think it was sort of a follow-up on Yaniv's comment. We had a quick chat because Solana is going to produce, because we're doing Firehose integration of Solana, it's going to produce a lot of files. There's a lot of data there, like I'm talking gigabytes per day, sometimes more, like maybe. So there's a lot of data, and then maybe people don't want to go about and produce that data from Genesis because that's relatively hard. And they'll want to share the already produced data. So we'll need to figure out ways to make sure we still have verifiability of that data, cross-checking, eventually slashing, some ways to, or devise a sort of an economy to share these things. This is similar to the notion of, I'm going to say time warp again, warp sync, right? So that like either subgraphs or Firehose, backing history could be shared between indexers and sold and have an economy there to so that people don't need to play things from Genesis, or people don't need to replay subgraphs from the beginning, incurring the time that it takes, but just preload them in their databases. So it was just had a few ideas about how that could happen. We had discussions also earlier about sharing information about the pre-processed subgraphs. Let's imagine the data dumps from Postgres. What if people could share that and speed up their syncing and then continue on just sync? But how do you verify the integrity of that data? How do you verify? Do you make sure that it's respectable data and it's validated in some ways? So I had some ideas, but that's the problematic that we're seeing arrive, or the opportunity, I would say, for a new type of economy. Yeah, Yaniv, I see.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, I do think that it's a really great thing about our indexer community that most of the indexers, it seems, are running their own archive nodes and they are validating from Genesis. And I think that that is really important, especially in a world where we expect fewer clients to actually be validating, themselves. The role of the indexers in the graph network might actually be that of, the clients in a blockchain network that actually do the validation, right? If somebody's going to validate the chain, it should be our indexers, the folks that have, bigger servers, that are more professionals, running these nodes. That said, not everybody's going to do it. So to me, part of the trick is, still, how do we encourage as many people as possible to validate the chain, to add as much security as possible to the different networks, while still allowing for a path for folks that need to optimize for speed and maybe weren't going to do it anyways. And then still, what are the security kind of guarantees going to be? How much security is there on these snapshots that are getting warp synced?
Right. That's the discussion sort of needs to happen. Have ideas? People have ideas. That'd be useful. I have a few ideas, but I want to hear other people first.
Warp sync is no less secure than a weak subjectivity checkpoint.
Yeah, I posted this in the chat, but Solana's basically already living in like a post EIP 4.4's world, in the sense that you have full nodes, or you have nodes that can't sync from Genesis, and like state snapshots are basically kind of shared through social consensus. So I think this is a really good test case for, figuring out what the story looks like for, not just Solana, but for Ethereum and probably many other chains that will end up going in this direction.
What are possible solutions to that? What are things that?
Yeah, just another piece of context is that I would kind of separate warp syncing or snapshots of the underlying blockchain like full node data and the snapshots for like the subgraph data. And I think both are valuable. You know, if folks are trying to like sync Solana and we can help them like quickly get their Solana nodes, you know, up and running, I think that's, you know, valuable. And, you know, the indexers are probably in the best position to like help each other kind of get up and running. Um, but that is also, I think, separate from like subgraph data. So I guess there's DB snapshots of subgraphs so you can get straight to sync at a specific block. I also think from an incentive standpoint, some of the, you know, parts of the problem are incentives for providing the snapshots in the first place, and then incentives for sharing the snapshots with others. You know, for example, we have query fees in the network, of course, which is, you know, for end users, you know, paying for queries. You know, would there be an equivalent here for, you know, for example, you know, payments per byte or per something if you just want to like download a giant, you know, multi-terabyte snapshot from somebody?
There's also the kind of third bucket of data, which is the Firehose output, the historical flat files. So yeah, the underlying node data, the Firehose flat files, and then the subgraph data, and each of them, you know, makes sense to offer as some kind of sync solution or bootstrapping solution for new indexers.
Would the Firehose data be easily derivable from the full node data?
No, it requires execution.
Right. Okay. So
And
just
in
save
some
me
ways,
that time.
yeah, in some ways, the Firehose data feels like a superior option for like nodes to load data from. I think we talked about this in Lisbon a little bit, but like even if you look at like what EIP 44s is planning to do, they're planning to shim together multiple like different versions of the Ethereum client into like kind of a virtual client that can actually sync from Genesis. And that becomes a lot easier to do safely if those things are just loading from like Firehose files, right? Like you could basically have one version of the node syncing, it's outputting Firehose files, and then the next one kind of loads its state right at the point where that sort of the consensus logic changed.
Yeah, Alex, were you saying that one of the goals for Firehose was that you could basically like hydrate a full node from the Firehose data because it was like it would be a superset?
So yes, that's a design goal, right? Now, some implementations, for example, Near does not have the full data to be able to do that. Maybe I'm wrong here, but that's the goal, so that you could, and even cross hydrate, right? You extract data from, I don't know, Open Ethereum and you hydrate Geth because the data is not different. Maybe you build some few indexes that are specific to that node because it lays out some data in some ways specifically, but it would be nothing missing. That's the design goal of the Firehose.
Yeah.
Just
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Yaniv. I just wanted to plus one Brandon's comment about, you know, distributing Firehose flat files as the kind of authoritative source for that data. I think it's going to be way easier to come to consensus on you know, effectively the correct data. To do so just through like hashes of the flat files is a lot simpler and much easier to verify than recreating
a
state.
RocksDB database, right? Then
yeah, exactly.
A database or a disk, a ZFS disk snapshot, which can have, you know, compacted, non-compacted state. And one thing I'd like to add is that the unit economics of all the different three mechanisms we discussed are all the same because they're flat data, like imagining CSV files for Postgres, flat files for Postgres, for Firehose, as you said, and eventually a RocksDB dump tar JZ. Like it's the same sort of cost model. I think paying for bytes works as a unit economics. So one sort of economic solution could deal with the three of them. That's what I think is interesting. We could have a pattern that is quite simple and feed a lot of things for the future.
Mm-hmm. So it seems to me like the rough shape of the solution here would be to have some kind of like staking contract where, you know, you would register, here's like a snapshot, you know, provide the hash, and then like some kind of deposit, like an amount that you're staking on that snapshot. Presumably other people could also like stake on the same snapshot. And then we consider that to be the economic security, because if someone basically disputes it, you'd need like a dispute protocol. Then whoever staked on it would get slashed.
Right.
Rather than, I think it definitely makes sense to explore, direct delivery through something like an HTTP endpoint, but I think it'd be really great to explore more decentralized protocols for sharing data across a network of participants. I mean, WebTorrent comes to mind. Like there are versions of the BitTorrent protocol that can run entirely. Yeah, I mean, we could effectively distribute data that way. And in some sense, you kind of get like a scaling of capacity and kind of social consensus based on the number of seeds for a given hash. And it all kind of seamlessly, the network and the capacity to serve data through it scales as more indexers join.
If you do have 50 indexers colluding though with like a bad snapshot, like they've just kind of inserted some malicious fake data, altered the database or whatever, you would be fine with there not being any penalties.
So you have to decouple, I guess, two things. Like one is like, what's the mechanism that proves the correctness of Firehose files that are generated? And then the other is the economic layer for serving those files. And those are sort of two separate design considerations. And so like the Web3 torrent, and honestly, like the graph should serve files. Like we already like have a pattern where many users like link to an IPFS file from like an entity attribute. And that should just sort of be a seamless developer experience. Like when you're querying an entity and you want to grab a file that it links to, like that should all be supported by our state channels and query market. And then the second part is how do you prove the correctness if the file's generated by the Firehose like instrumented node? And that looks a lot closer to like verifiable indexing, right? Like where you want some kind of deterministic process that, you could do potentially like a bisection protocol, figure out where two nodes diverge, and then prove that one execution path was correct and the other one was incorrect, and there might be stake attached to that, right?
Right. I would imagine that we're not going to be able to like run entire
where you kind of do like
nodes in Wasm.
It could either be like a proof of stake thing, or it could be like an optimistic to another chain.
Brandon, I think you're having issues with your network. There's a lot of lag now, just to let you know.
Yeah,
I think you were saying something.
Yeah, I was just saying, I wouldn't expect that we would be able to run like blockchain nodes in Wasm to be able to do like a full bisection protocol, but like, syncing nodes kind of by construction of the blockchain nodes, like should be deterministic, and you should be able to get to consensus, and you might not be able to prove on chain, where the syncing went wrong, but it feels like, voting, like some kind of, voting process could be used, for in a dispute resolution protocol.
I could imagine that each block be sort of hashed together and signed either atomically or Merkleized across, 1,000 blocks, one chunk. And at some point you have a tree and you publish that one. So you could prove that you did sign all of them. It could be verified, and you would publish from time to time, but have that granularity and maybe when you're in the more real time, because there's that issue also if you want speed, right? There's a trade-off between the allocations that you put when you close an allocation. It's, let's say it's 10 hours late, and then you have all that time that could have, things that are happening, collusion or whatever. So maybe there's also the fact that we receive for some blocks, the signature right away, and then eventually it gets cobbled up to on chain, but you can, probably dispute it faster, like maybe 1-2 blocks late.
I was wondering about the staking part though, because if on top of creating the data set and then providing the data set, meaning bandwidth for downloading, you need on top to provide more financial means to deliver it basically as a service. Is that the right approach? And can we not have something that the payment for getting the data from the provider is locked for a certain time, and can be returned or something like that, and provide the sort of the protection in terms of the data correctness in that sense, rather than having to stake on already potentially significant resources that you're putting in.
It's an interesting point. So is this something that we feel like, it doesn't seem like it would be a blocker, let's say for Solana support, but I guess, we've opened up the conversation now to say that this is probably something that we should tackle at some point. Maybe we find an owner to, run a little bit further, kind of thinking through a proposed design. And I mean, do we want to reflect on like what kind of timeframes would make sense to try to get something like this?
I'd participate in some group. I like all the verifiability things. I wouldn't lead, but I'd like to participate and work on that. As for the time frame, I think what we're going to see is that people are going to have handshake deals to share these files. Like it's going to have cost you, I don't know, $10,000 to process. So maybe you sell it for 2,000 because you hope to sell it 5 times. And when we could perhaps gather some of that, indexer community insight and see how we transform that into a on-chain business and then secure it in some ways. But I think, writing contracts for that, designing the thing is going to take a little bit of time. So if we want it done at some point and the economy to participate in the graph economy, right, with the token. So we'll it's better sooner than later to at least think about it.
I'd also like to participate, but probably don't have the bandwidth to own.
Cool.
So we
All
just
right,
need
Pedro,
to find
thanks for
one
starting
owner.
this discussion. Mhm.
Yeah, no worry. We just need to find one owner then, and we have a task force now. Cool. Okay, we're right at the top of the hour. I think we should wrap up here. Nice discussion. Pretty cool. Thanks for joining all. Happy Christmas. Happy New Year. I'll see you in a month. Do be on the lookout in the forum. We'll be sharing some new updates. As mentioned, we will be revamping the foundation's Notion. So we have all of these working groups sharing updates in there, so you can all follow along with all of these upcoming milestones.